Welcome to OverBoost, a podcast interview series featuring discussions with speedrunners about their history in speedrunning and the runs they're passionate about. I am your host, PMC Trilogy, and with me today is Ecdycis. Ecdycis, how are you?
Doing all right. Can't complain.
Yeah, it's 2020, right? Like, how do you answer that question? But maybe something, I always like to start the conversation with something like a recent trend or something that you've been working on your streams recently. And I know, I think even your last stream was on the topic of horror indie games. And I feel like this is something that's really exploded recently. Like, I used to think of indie games as mostly 2D platformers, but the past few years there's been like Haunted PS1, Dread X Collection, and I noticed that recently you've been speedrunning them more as a person, as a horror speedrunner and streamer. How do you feel about all the horror indie games and their potential for speedrunning?
A lot of them are pretty good. The most recent one has been the convenience store. It's been a lot of fun. It's kind of an interesting grind of, there's really, since they're indie games and newer, there's a lot more tricks than you would expect there to be. At the same time, they're not too long. They're kind of shorter on the end, so you can kind of fit more of them in, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that follows, because I think I've played a few games like Paratopic, for example, and I feel like my experience of those is the length is right, but sometimes because they're often made with more modern tools, there may or may not be tech available. I think you mentioned the convenience store, which seems to have some really cool skips.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Hopefully to be more like that. not saying that I want people to put out broken things, but tricks are good. But let's go back in time then. Let's to I guess, where does gaming start for you? Like, what's the foundation? Is it something that you got from family, friends?
Pretty much just been playing for all my life for the most part. Remember getting I want to say, PlayStation from my uncle. And from then, I've kind of been able to just keep playing for the most part. It's nothing too crazy in that regard.
Were you always playing spooky game? Like, did you have Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2, or were you more into other games?
Actually.
Silent Hill, okay.
That was the big one from my end. So I remember getting like a big stack of games from my uncle, me and my brothers, and then we would play a bunch of them. In particular, the ones I remember the most are Crash Bandicoot games, Twisted Metal, and Silent Hill.
Man, whatever happened to car combat?
They tried reviving it, I think, in I don't remember what year. I started they made the Twisted Metal reboot, I think, like 2013 or 2012 or something.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's been a few, but it's just funny that it's never really taken off. Yeah. So that's okay. So and you said really that it's been sort of constant for you, that you really haven't had like, oh, in high school I'm too cool for video games or anything like that.
No, I've never had anything like that. Always kind of enjoyed it. Always a good time, I say.
Do you still have the ancestral PlayStation that started it all?
It's somewhere, but I don't know where. Is the only problem. It's one of those things where I'm not entirely certain on where it may be at this point, but maybe. I moved around a few times, so I'm not too sure. Sure. That's understandable. Moving will do that, definitely. Yeah.
So going from there, how do you get into, I guess, which comes first, maybe Twitch or speedrunning?
Well, I started speedrunning back around 2017 or so. I wanted to, actually at that point I worked an IT job. I had a friend kind of put on Bloodborne, which I guess thing just came out around that time, and it looked cool. So then when I stopped working that friend on the job, I was like, you know what, I'm curious, are there any other games? So I started watching other games from my childhood that I enjoyed. And with that, I was just kind of been able to get into more and more from that point. And then eventually, the first game I ended up doing was a game called The Clock Tower, which I had good memories playing with some close friends from high school. We didn't get very far in it, but then after kind of like looking into it, it kind of worked. So from then on, I kind of just kept learning games, and it worked out pretty nicely.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. I know we're gonna talk about the Clock Tower run itself, but it seemed interesting to me that, especially for your streaming and speedrunning, that Clock Tower, and when we say Clock Tower, we're talking about Clock Tower SNES, the original game that
Correct.
I'm pretty sure doesn't have an official localized version.
It only ever came out in Japan. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So how did you and your friends in high school come to play that game? Because I mean, I guess was it you just playing on a ROM on an emulator, or?
Yeah, we pretty much ended up doing emulation and stuff like that. And from what I remember, I kind of just went to with some friends. I think we got invited to eat. We're talking about horror games for some reason, and then one of them mentioned a game where a teenage girl is getting chased around by a guy with a giant pair of scissors. And I thought, that sounds hilarious. I want to play that. So I think we started on Clock Tower PS1, and our one friend ended up buying a copy, and we kind of just beat the whole thing in one night, essentially. And from then on, we eventually emulated the SNES version and tried playing that with the English fan translation. And from that point, I didn't really follow up on that until much later when I would kind of break into speedrunning on my own.
Cool. So your shtick, I think, in part is that you, again, I know this from watching your stream, that you run a wide variety of horror games and horror adjacent games. At what point did you really start counting? Because I feel like now if you tune into the Ecdycis stream, you always know, like, it's 69 plus. So at what point did you say, like, this is going to be my jam, my shtick, that I'm gonna count the number of games?
I want to say it was around 9. Around 8 or 9 or so. I want to say it was February of 2018. Originally, my goal was I started. I don't want to call it full-time streaming exactly, because now I'm more full-time streaming. But my initial goal, though, was just I wanted to learn more and more games. So as a result of that, I ended up kind of just learning a bunch of games that kind of worked with me. Originally, I wanted to do things like Bioshock, which I eventually learned because that's poor adjacent, I would call. I wanted to do Super Mario Sunshine, actually. I wanted to do Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. And then, really, the fourth game was Clock Tower when I started. But when I decided to learn a bunch of games in 2018, what happened was I just sort of realized, hey, every single game I picked is a horror game. I'm just going to keep doing that. And then I kind of made it a big thing where I was like, okay, I'm going to be the guy who does only the horror games. And it's been pretty fun so far, so I've been liking that.
Awesome. No, it's really, I don't know, the breadth is really neat just because you get to play all sorts of excellent games. It's not one of the games that you brought up. I usually I'll guess when I ask a guest what games that they want to discuss in the later part of the interview. And I was, of course, very curious because I think my favorite game of yours is The Ring Terror's Realm. Can you tell me how it is that you came to play and speedrun The Ring Terror's Realm?
I'm trying to remember exactly. I think I heard about it because some viewers at the time suggested a really interesting game on the Dreamcast known as The Ring. And that game actually wasn't on the docket for learning, believe it or not. What I did for a while when I was streaming 2018 would be I would do both speedruns and casual games. And at that time, I was doing a vote for a casual game because I like having people who watch me vote on what I would be doing. So we voted on The Ring because I want to say my friend Pasama recommended it. And then from that point, I played it and I was like, this game is amazing. I am in love with this game. So I beat it, and then I immediately routed it right after I beat it casually. I think my first run of that game was about 2 hours. I just love many types of horror games, especially ones that are not good. It's like the weirder, the worse they are. They all really intrigue me. They're all really interesting feelings of game. So The Ring was kind of a natural calling at that point, and it hit the point where I was the only runner for a while. I routed pretty much the whole thing by myself because no one dared to route it beforehand. And then I kind of found all the little things that made that game tick with the help of one, my friend Pasama, and then another viewer who was a part of the chat.
Awesome. No, it's been really cool to see the effort too, and I think you mentioned Pasama. There's been a little leaderboard competition that's helped drive the time lower as well, which has been really really fun to see. Also, the one song in that game I can never get out of my head.
Yeah, it plays really for a while. That's part of the reason why I knew about that game existing, just because of that song.
All right, let's get some takes here. I am very much curious because you've run so many games. What would you say is your favorite run that you've done?
Easily going to be Clock Tower.
Easily going to be Clock Tower. I thought that might be the case. But what about the flip side? What's the worst?
So people who watch me, there's a meme that goes on where I complain about this game that I did because a friend, actually the friend who got me into Clock Tower, funny enough, he recommended I do a game that I convinced him to buy as a kind of in jest. There used to be like a local game shop in our hometown. And when we went there, I was like, hey, man, you should buy this game, Wallace and Gromit, Curse the Were-Rabbit. It costs like $2. It's like, yeah, sure. We played a little bit at his house, and then like we immediately dropped it, and then he brought it up as a stream idea. I played it one day, and it's surprisingly not the worst speedrun I've ever played. The worst one, personally, I think is a game called the Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem to me. I am not a fan of it. There's nothing I liked about it. I had zero good times with it. Wallace and Gromit at this point is kind of infamous in my community, and a lot of people kind of immediately think that's the worst one to me. I don't think it's that bad, all things considered. If I'm drunk enough, I'll run it. I'll have a fun time with it. But Scooby-Doo was also shorter. It took me a while to finish it on stream because I had a rule when I started to where I would consider a game learned if I even beat it once and if I were able to just complete it while using speed tech, which I have some pretty bad times on some games because I never wanted to go back to them. I actually changed the rule for this later on, so I can only do games I played casually to avoid having to do things like that. But Scooby-Doo took me on 3 hours and 48 minutes, and I feel like the game just wasn't well designed because every single time it felt like the game wanted to kill me. It didn't want to test me. It just wanted to kill me at every point. And there wasn't really much redeemable in terms of meme factor either, so why would I play it? So that's the worst game to me.
No, that's extremely fair. It doesn't sound like a great game to play.
No, it's not. As far as I can tell, there's still an active leaderboard to that, and people are still doing it to this very day, like on a monthly basis. I'm last place in that leaderboard, so if you don't feel good, you can beat my 3 hour, 48 minute time. I promise I'm not going to go back to it.
What are the most of the times in that leaderboard in that neighborhood, or are they?
No, I think the second worst time is 2 hour 20 minutes, and everything after that's sub 2 hour.
Okay, well there you go. I mean, licensed video games are always such a weird. You never like. I feel like what you get on the licensed video game really depends upon the era, I guess, of game. That it's coming from, but
yeah. And truthfully, from what I remember, the worst part I remember about that wasn't the speedrun tech. It was just the game. Like there are parts of the game. I remember like a minecart section that it would try to kill you as much as possible. There's like a motorbike section. If you went too far either direction, you just died. So you had to like perfectly balance in the middle, and it wasn't really as intuitive as it looked. And I mean, I had other issues in other games before, but most games I've kind of been able to either grind down or, adjust to and kind of figure it out quickly. That game I just wasn't enjoying, which is part of the reason why I made the rule for myself where it's if I don't play a game casually, I'm not going to speedrun it, because for a while I would learn any game, whether or not I did it casually or not, but then from that point forward, I was like, okay, this sucks. I'm not having a fun time routing games. I'm not having a fun time learning games. I'm only doing games I've done casually now, so it's fresh in my brain, because a lot of my best runs were done that way, like The Ring, actually. So it's a fun example of that one.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule, too. Like, obviously at this point, you've played enough speed games that it's not a matter of getting into speedrunning. It's not the advice that you're giving to someone who's asking about getting into speedrunning, where it's the advice is play something you really, really love. Once you get more into speedrunning, you can more readily apply what you've learned to games, but like still maybe you probably want to stick to something you've finished casually.
Yeah, it works way better for just trying to finish a game, and I've been able to do pretty good in a lot of games. Some games are still pretty like pulling teeth, but a lot of them are pretty fun, all things considered.
Do you feel that you have now? I know we've clarified that you are speedrunning horror games, and that's your jam, and that's what you do on your stream. Do you feel like you have a sort of mission statement when it comes to your, I guess, presence in the speedrun community for these games? Do you feel like you do routing or glitch hunting, or you like to really grind for top times? I mean, I think you've already sort of hinted at what your role is, but I'd be curious to hear you say it.
I would think my strongest roles are grinding and rerouting. Rerouting is a big thing that for some reason comes up often when I play games. Like, whenever I kind of get into a community, most of them are already pretty well done. Like, the only real baby of a game I kind of have is The Ring, weirdly enough, and a few other games that I've kind of recently helped develop. But even then, like, just last week, I picked up a game called Babysitter Bloodbath, which is a puppet combo game that is really short. And I originally was going off the thought of this weird SDA run from like 2014, and then I found out, oh, hey, this game got entirely rerouted a while back. I didn't know that. I found out there was tech for that game after I discovered it. I kind of find things on accident. I ask a question like, hey, why are we doing this and not this? And then it sometimes just happens to be the question where nobody asked it at some point. And there's many games I've done where there's like little changes mailed that in. That's mostly rerouting, I suppose. But in terms of games, I've grinded quite a lot of them, and I usually try to get a decent time, depending on how much I like the game. If I don't like the game, I won't go for a decent time.
Sure. No, that's probably good advice. Don't lose your mind grinding a game you don't like.
Oh, yeah. And even sometimes I have to take breaks, too, which is why I wanted to learn so many different games. I really wanted to avoid burnout, so being able to not have to grind. Lately, Clock Tower 3 has been kind of a game for that. I've been able to grind other games like The Convenience Store, like White Day, like, well, The Ring, as an example. I kind of have the freedom of choice with so many different games, which is why I want to learn a bunch.
Now, so I think you had mentioned this already, but you somewhat recently went full-time streaming. You gained partner status on Twitch and all that. Just, I guess, so right now, we're recording this in July of 2020, and if I remember right, you went full-time right around end of February, beginning of March, right?
Beginning of February.
Beginning of February, okay.
So pretty much like just February 1st.
So that's pretty good timing, right?
Yeah, it's been, I want to say we started the 6 months, about the half of the year, official, after the end of this month.
How does it feel to have been doing it for half a year? I mean, do you feel like it's working out, or?
A lot of pros and cons, but ultimately good. I'd say it's ultimately good, but there's a lot of swinging, and most of the things that people told me when I started are reigning true. So it's not too bad.
All right, I'm glad to hear that. That's sort of obviously a big life change, and can be.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Can be pretty scary. All right, well, in that case, I think we've kind of gone through a lot of the upfront stuff. Let's move over to some of these specific games. Now, we already discussed a little bit of Clock Tower, SNES, and you mentioned how you had gotten into running the game.
Right.
In terms of the run that I looked at in particular, because I wanted to look at something that was more recent, so I wanted the leaderboard, and I saw that a few months back, you got the looks like the S ending world record. But this is a game that has a plurality of endings.
Right.
What do you feel like? I mean, if I were to be, if you were to go to, I don't know, GDQ and you could run any ending, what's the ending that you want, and what do you think are the endings that are best for running, or are they all pretty similar?
Most of them are going to be S ending, barring G, D, H, and all. My personal favorite is S ending, just because it's the one that got me into speedrunning. It's what I've been doing for quite literally years. I've actually been doing Clock Tower S ending longer than I've been streaming in a consistent manner, in a weird kind of way. I think A ending is actually really cool, but nobody does it, and I don't have the same motivation to grind that category as I do S ending. But S ending would be the one I would say.
Now, in terms of describing how this game plays, because I think a lot of people hear old survival horror and they think like tank controls, 3D tank controls with pre-rendered backgrounds or something like that.
Right.
But this game is it's more of a point and click adventure, right?
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to ask, now in watching the run, it seemed like the way you were describing it, there's a lot of RNG failure points. What are some of the RNG failure points that you can run into during a Clock Tower run?
So for exclusively hard RNG, there's a 1 in 80 chance you'll actually get a run off the ground and going where you need to for world record pace. If you're not going for world record, these don't actually matter. Like, this only matters if you're grinding the world record consistently. But for one, you have a 1 in 2 chance in the first 30 seconds of the run. You either get it here or you don't. If you do, go forward. From that point forward, you have to find the library in a 1 in 5 chance. It could be 1 of 5 rooms. Usually it's not, so I end up resetting there a lot. If you find the library where it needs to be, you need a book in the library. It's a 1 in 2 chance once again. So if you get that book, great. If you don't get the book, well, reset the run. And then after that, you get over halfway through the run, and then you need to find a crow room in a very specific spot. If you find that crow room, you've gone the 1 in 80, and you can go forward. However, this also excludes things like Bobby can just randomly spawn sometimes. It's happened during weird runs, and it can lose the run entirely. Bobby can get really aggressive during one of the early game skips, and if he does, well, you lose 10 seconds off the bat, meaning world record's dead. There's a doll fight you have to do, which normally you try to manipulate it, but it doesn't always work, so it can randomly decide to extend the fight. If it does that, run is dead. Bobby can randomly spawn in another room, but this one's more likely than the random Bobby spawn in any room. This happens a lot of the time to newer runners, because it's kind of like a set amount of time you're in that room, you'll spawn. It's RNG on the exact amount of time, I think, but you normally don't run into it, but it can happen for newer runners. The game is extremely RNG heavy for the most part.
Now, so I've just asked questions about some of the things that were, sort of obvious to me from looking at the leaderboard or watching a VOD. Is there any sort of tech or other feature that you would want to highlight as being a favorite part of, you running the game?
Yeah. So when I started running this game 3 years ago, it had a pretty set route. A lot of the tricks are already there. But the big one was when I officially got into running this game, I mentioned the whole rerouting thing I've always kind of been good at. I thought for a moment, and I noticed that the run was using a trick on one part of the game, but never used it anywhere else. And that's because I guess we didn't know if we can do it or not. The trick is called the text skip, and what you do is normally you want to use an item. You have the item menu up while you get text, and then you can alternate back and forth between the item, and then it will prompt text at the bottom. Since that text is also shared with whatever dialogue's happening in the game, you immediately overwrite it, and whatever happens ends. Meaning, if Jennifer's talking to a dead body for like 20 seconds, it immediately makes it a 1 second thing if you have to do it. So it saves a lot of time on every single section you can do it. Originally, it was only used to talk to Lot's dead body later in the game after the dog. A lot of times you don't see this anymore because of the amount of new tech that also got brought in after I got into the game. But a lot of this stuff was really not done before I got in. I started doing this, and I mentioned, well, I found it already existed because there's actually a Japanese task run that did all these things and was way faster than anyone did. The moment that was found, there were a lot of world records set that month.
That's always so much fun when you have the tech discovery and then there's just the cluster of new record times being set.
Yeah, going into that game, it was pretty much dormant right when I got in. One guy, Crazy Berserker, had world record in every category for over a year at that point. And then I kept grinding the game. I'm looking at my first submitted time. It was a 16:45, which I think was top 4 at that time. Because, I mean, there was a decent amount of runners on it, but a lot of them weren't using the glitches. A lot of them weren't really running it that often. So I was finally able to kind of get a run going, and it felt pretty nice. And then I wanted to keep grinding it. And once I eventually got good enough, they ended up looking at that task thing I talked about, which then it kind of blew open. And I've actually had the Clock Tower world record S ending for over 3 years now.
Is the S ending category the most competitive one, or?
It's arguably the most competitive for the most part, but H ending would also be pretty competitive because that's like the effective normal 98%, I would say. Like, it's really easy. You go left for 2 minutes and then you win. So that core category as well tends to get a lot of submitters because it's just go left, and a lot of people are able to go left.
No, I mean, that describes my politics perfectly. Okay, so I guess if you were to sort of pitch this, because I know this is like, your main thing. If you were to pitch this to folks as a speedrun to learn, I'd be curious to hear what that pitch would be. I feel like you've already given part of it, but
I wouldn't even go with the horror game route. It's a point and click speedrun where you skip all the parts to make a point and click suck.
That's it. I honestly, that's kind of what I thought it would be, but no, you've said it. You've said it concisely. That is
going
correct.
Into everything. Oh, hey, obstacle in the way. You avoid it. You avoid 2 of the major item pickups that you have to do to beat the game. You just skip them. You run through a dog to do that. Oh, hey, there's too much dialogue in the game. You skip it. You actually do lag reduction in the game. You can reduce the amount of lag going on so your character runs faster. When you get items in that game, it gets really busted, and it's great. However, it's only available in the SNES version, weirdly enough. So I don't actually like the PlayStation or PC runs. Nobody does those because they're not good.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. So Clock Tower, of course, and we've been calling it Clock Tower SNES, but there are, JP as well, JP exclusive versions that are on PlayStation 1 and PC, but it seems like the SNES run is really where it's at.
Yeah, you really kind of get the full breadth of the run, and you can do all the fun glitches and stuff. So it's quite nice.
All right, let's move over to next thing. We got 4 games that we're going through here, and I'm gonna move over. Actually, you want to do Silent Hill 2 or Dead Rising next?
Dead Rising.
Dead
ideally.
Rising. Okay, Dead Rising. I'm really curious about it because I've seen you do. I think in particular, Dead Rising time skip. It seems like in this game that overwhelmingly the PC runs are more popular, but there's also a lot of categories, and it seems like a lot of these categories come from mods. Is that correct?
Correct. So Dead Rising originally was a meme speedrun, and the way it worked was I actually have world record in the big meme category, ending F right now. What you do is you waited for 4.5 hours. And then you just beat the game up until I think chapter 7. The moment you did that, you waited, and you really just get world record off loading times. For a while, I didn't want to run Dead Rising because that's all there was. But then I think around late December, early January, the community made a mod, specifically one of the community members named Suzuka. He came up with a mod called Time Skip. Time Skip allowed you to do the main story missions, but the timer would immediately go to the next case. So instead of being a 4-hour slog, right now it's like a 30-minute run.
Man, that's really cool. Do you have any particular takes about that? Because I feel like there's been discourse in speedrunning about the use of mods to sort of make a game more palatable to speedrunning. Because here it seems like a no-brainer, right? It seems like, of course, this is what you want.
Yeah, I would argue what it applies to. Dead Rising, no-brainer. It fixes the game. Someone might go like, oh, let's not use mods. Okay, enjoy the 4-hour run. RE3 has been a big example lately. I think some mods are okay, but recently they've found a mod for all the RNG to be gone. I think that kind of ruins a lot of the spirit. I like RNG in games, but that will tend to happen, and it could be a slippery slope in theory. I know people say that all the time whenever it gets kind of like, oh, this happens and this will happen. For RE3, it actually did kind of happen, and that's currently being debated over there right now. I'm personally not a fan of everything being RNG, but also if it's something trivial, I don't think it's that bad. I can see 1 or 2 examples, but the problem is if you say that, then it could be anything in there. So it really depends. A good example I kind of like, but also I just think the game's kind of long and it wouldn't make much of a difference anyway, was Bioshock Infinite.
I was about to bring that game up.
The Hill Runner's hat. I don't think that's as bad just because it's the only thing that is really that gatekeeping. It's the only gate, and it's a 1 in 50 for a 1 in 50 jump that's massive. So in order to make it more interesting, it works. And I think that's in the value of interest. Well, with RE3, if they mod all the RNG out, for instance, I wouldn't be a fan of that. That ruins a lot of the fun of trying to get that surprise. Trying to get some of the guesses in the game. They're really fun. I know it's probably not the best to run. I run the game. I'm not the best at it, but I have a decent time.
Yeah, if anything, I would say the strongest argument is probably that RE3 will remain popular just fine, whereas Dead Rising and Bioshock Infinite, I think, were both suffering without those mods.
Dead Rising pretty much didn't exist before the mod. I actually remember talking to some of the runners because I would watch them before the mod, and I was like, hey, if you ever get a mod for this game that allows us to skip everything, let me know. They did, and I actually figured out because I was following the speedrunner.com page, and I was like, okay, this is going to be my first run of 2018 that I would learn. So the reason why I actually want to pick Dead Rising is because it was the first major speedrun that kind of put me on the long path over to the amount of games I have now.
So you already mentioned that I think time skip is kind of the big category. And in particular, I think the run I watched was time skip, new game. When it comes to new game versus new game plus, what are the differences, and do you have a preference?
I like new game way better. I like new game because you have to play the game. New game plus, you just kind of kill everything with the Mega Man Buster, and it's fast. New game, you actually have to start from level 1. You don't get any bonuses. You can die. There's risk. I like risk in my speedruns very often. So I usually will kind of go with whichever category offers more of a unique run, which tends to be new game. In most runs I do, I like new game. Like RE7, I tend to gravitate towards new game runs. There's very few examples I like new game plus, and I think the only two I can name are Silent Homecoming and Haunting Ground. But even then, I've started enjoying Haunting Ground new game a lot more, but that's also just kind of because I've been rerouting that.
Yeah, Homecoming New Game Plus is definitely. I don't even run that game, and I was like, yeah, you probably want New Game Plus in that game.
Well, the only reason I like New Game Plus is because when I was learning it, it had more clips, so you got to do more of the glitches that were there. While New Game had less glitches, and the boss fights were pretty trivial, all considered. So the hard part of the run was, can you do the cool glitches? I was just like, yeah, you know what, I'm down to do that.
Excellent. So, are there any other? So, with Dead Rising, I think you mentioned before that there's some risk, and I know from watching the run, it seems like a part of the run is sort of, I guess, maintaining your resources, like skateboards, things like that. What would you kind of highlight as the cool part of Dead Rising time skip new game?
Definitely skateboarding. Skateboarding's definitely the coolest one. Although with new game specifically, shotguns and inventory management. You kind of have to make sure your skateboards don't die instantly because, well, in New Game Plus, you get more boards, you get more magazines, you can just be safer. There's nothing too bad there. But in the other category, New Game, well, boss fights require you to conserve your ammo. Are you firing properly? Are you going to be accurate? If you're not, well, you lose the run. There's another strat as well where you get to beat a man to death with a hockey stick. You don't get to do that in New Game Plus.
Oh, is that true? That was very entertaining. Seeing that hockey stick thing.
Like, you have to be creative in New Game. While in New Game Plus, the answer will always default to Mega Man. Because the Buster just will one-shot almost everything in the game.
Are there any other categories that you are into? Because, again, it seems like there is really a plethora of categories here.
Personally, I like Psycho Scuba Person, and that route got kind of crazy, so I was like, I'm going to drop out of that one. But over time, New Game was actually one of my favorite ones for a while. I was a big fan of that category.
Well, that sounds neat. Honestly, I think the discourse in particular about mods and speedruns is very, very worth it, and something that I think I want to encourage everyone to think about. Like, if it seems like your speedrun is dying just because, you have to do X or Y, like maybe you don't have to do X or Y, like maybe you really can have, because looking at the Dead Rising leaderboard now, there's a lot of people, there's 10 people in Time Skip New Game Plus, and same on, there's plenty of people, more than a lot of speedrun leaderboards. So definitely, I think the lesson here is take that to heart and maybe think about what you can do to really change things up. All right, let's get over to Silent Hill 2. In particular, the run of yours that I watched for Silent Hill 2 was the hard mode run, which I believe is currently the record time.
I believe it might be. That one, though, I have record, though, for a weird reason. It's not a bad run. There's a bit of a weird reason why I have record in that category.
Would you like to tell us the weird reason?
Nobody wants to run it. It's not like it's an easy category, and it's still a great time. It's just normally the competition would be punchy, but I know actively he does not like that category because the difficulty creep at the very end is absolutely insane. And you can lose an entire run because the final boss is just ridiculous. I've had like minute-long PBs in that category recently, like within the past couple of months, where actually I think that's the one where my entire early game was mediocre or bad. My final boss fight literally saved a minute, I think.
No, I think that's right. I think watching the video, I can confirm that because I know you were talking during the run saying that one of the differences between hard mode and the other modes is that the boss fights really are that much more substantial in hard mode.
Oh yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about, because I think I had seen this when it became a thing, but Silent Hill 2, like many other games, is one of those games that recently had a big bout of RNG manipulation sort of figured out and added into the run. Can you talk a little bit about how that came up and what that manip is?
So what happened was, in the Discord, first off, there's been this guy who posts runs every now and again. He doesn't submit to a leaderboard. He just has I don't remember what kind of link it was, but he has a link to a run, which is currently better than any world record time on the leaderboard for every category. He has some insane movements, some insane strats, and he figured this out a while back on almost everything, where he was able to guess most of the game's RNG ahead of time. Nobody knew what he was doing, though. But I remember one day when the game was kind of having a few runners. Apparently it happened in other streams too, but no one brought any attention to it. But actually it happened in my stream when this happened. I was playing the game, I was doing the usual stuff. People who are newer to Silent Hill 2, the game has what's the word? It has a few RNG seeds. These RNG seeds dictate things like the early game clock puzzle, some numbers in a hospital. There's an arsonist puzzle, which is a 1 in 6 chance of drawing the right one. There's a briefcase later in the game, which, well, you have to try guessing either 1 in 19, or you can get a safe answer, which is slightly slower. I would actually love going for all the RNG dice rolls. So I'd be doing this. I'd be doing my usual dice rolls. But then I remember very clearly, I actually have a clip of it. I think it's the top clip on my Twitch channel, weirdly enough. But I was playing the game normally, and I was getting to the point where I learned the second number. This guy in chat named Sonal Tulak typed the number as a 4-digit combination, entirely random. He typed the full number it was. He was guessing. I was like, hey, man, you can't really guess the number. Like, that's not how it works. And then I looked at his number, and I was like, oh, he got it dead on correct, which when before no one had been able to guess that. That is a bit more than coincidence, because guessing a 4-digit number off a random message isn't really going to be something a random chatter does. So as a result, I ended up just bringing one of the mods, also a good friend Punchy, into I just added him in Discord. I was like, hey, come to my stream really quick. I have some questions about speedrunning ethics that I have to wonder about. He came in, and we pretty much found out the guy's whole method, which is a giant RNG sheet showing tables. And I think they actually made a tool which kind of fixes all the RNG now, or manipulates it, I should say.
Now, so the way the RNG manipulation is working, is it just that you're observing things and noting them so that it determines later RNG, or are you actually able to take action to fix it yourself?
So what happens is, from the game boot up, you don't touch anything. You let the game boot up normally. Once it gets to the main menu, you quickly boot it up as quickly as you can. From then, the way I do it, I don't use the tool which can calculate it, but I have a table of, which is the original table you had. It's 100 values, and they tell you all clock times. So you play the game up to the clock RNG, so that's going to still be RNG. It's not massive, but it can make like a 10-second difference if you get really bad or really good. You play up to then. You note the clock time of when it starts, though. So, like, it's on, like, I don't know, like 6:20. You'll like, okay, 6:20. And then you'll look at the RNG chart. You'll look at, like, the first 50 values or so. And if you see 6:20, you'll look at the rest of the RNG. If you did it correctly, the number you correspond should be able to tell you every other puzzle in the game, which I've gotten pretty down nicely. You don't always get good numbers or good RNG, though, but now you know what you're going to get.
No, that sounds like that really solves things. I think one of my recent interviews I had done was with Final Fantasy VIII runner, and there's some sort of some similar energy there where you can just observe things and like, oh well, now I know the combination lock. Very, very interesting. So in terms of tech, the one tech that I wanted to ask about, because it's plainly obvious from watching the run, is that you can. It seems like you can glitch a lot of the text in the game, in particular, like the game saved text will stay on the screen. And I think, from watching the VOD, you described this as being able to accomplish several things. In particular, you're able to maintain stamina pretty much consistently throughout the run for having a good run speed. Is that correct? And are there other things going on with that glitching?
So that's just kind of a product of the PC version. They kind of made a rush port for PC. Konami, I think it was Creature Labs who ended up doing it. Originally it was just a PC version, but then they made a PC version. So they're like, hey, you got to put a quick save in there because that's what PC gamers like. So they quickly added one in to kind of satisfy Konami, and they added a quick load as well. There wasn't much testing, though, because it was kind of rushed development with the port, because Konami wanted it that way. Nothing wrong with the devs. It just Konami was demanding, hey, you got to make it fast, got to make it snappy. So as a result, the game saving kind of led to breaking the game whenever there's text on the screen. Anytime text shows up on the screen as well, you regain stamina. So there's kind of a lot of things that attributed to the game saving that allowed us to have a variety of different ways to break the game, essentially.
Now, and so stamina is being able to maintain your stamina is one of them. Are there any other really important ones?
You can skip cutscenes. By doing that, you skip another boss fight. You can go out of bounds. This one trick lets you do a few different things, which is quite nice.
And now, beyond that, would there be anything that you would highlight in Silent Hill 2 as sort of being your favorite feature of the run?
Honestly, I just love the game. I kind of enjoy every part of it, so it ends up working out in that favor. Pretty much hit the nail on the head with a lot of the game saving, but I've always just loved the game. Some of one of my favorites for a while, so being able to run it's kind of nice. I would say just as a whole, it's one of the games that kind of grew a lot with me as a streamer, so I enjoy it quite a lot.
Now I know you've done some meme runs for this too, right? I think
Yeah.
we talked. You know, I as I said, I studied and took notes on the hard mode run. Is hard mode actually your favorite category though, or would you describe yourself as really a knife only runner?
Knife only is fun, whichever way you want to slice that, because there's great, there's plank only and there's great knife only, which plank only would be more of like an actual knife only that you would normally see like Resident Evil runners do. And then great knife only is a meme category that Techie and Big Man Japan helped me out with by giving me a file that allows me to get the great knife right from the beginning of the game. It's a funny category, but it's pretty brutal because it's just, I think, 3 hours long.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's a real. It feels as long as the animation for swinging it, as is how I would put it.
Yeah, it's pretty long, but it's pretty funny to kind of see the victories in that and try to do the fights. Beating on hard mode is definitely doable. I'll say that much. But in a more serious sense, I think my favorite category had to be normal, which is the kind of, it's not the standard any percent, but it was the old SDA like normal run of the game, and it's just a really fun run to do for me.
No, I mean it's also cool too, just to be involved in as much as I think we've been talking about maybe some runs or games that are more off the beaten path. I think it's really fun to also just being a big leaderboard and with a larger community. All right, yeah. But let's get to something a little more spicy though, because I think the last game that we're gonna cover is NightCry, and initially, my first question for you in NightCry was going to be, did you back it? But this was spoiled for me by watching your AGDQ 2020 run, in which you have already told the world that you did not back NightCry.
I would have if I could have, but I was a college student with no money.
So did you know about the Kickstarter at the time, or if you were in college, were you not yet looking for horror games? It sounds like, I know you said Clock Tower, because this is NightCry, I understand, is right. A sort of spiritual successor to Clock Tower. So maybe you only looked for NightCry once you got back into Clock Tower?
I was aware it existed, but I didn't fully dive into it until like way later because I just didn't have the money to buy it. I didn't have the money to play it. College will do that.
Yeah, no, college does do that. But it's worth mentioning that this, is again spiritual successor to the Clock Tower series, but a little buggy, a little weird. How do you feel about speedrunning this? Because I couldn't tell how much this is a meme.
As a showcase, I think it's one of my favorite games to show off. As a world record grind, I would rather play anything else. Damn. The main reason why is because as a world record grind, you remove all the parts that make NightCry fun. The memes, the fun cutscenes, pretty much anything I do in the GDQ run, you don't do. You don't get a joke about, I mean, you still make some of the jokes, but like, for example, in the GDQ run, I showed off one of the early game characters dying to a soda machine. You skip that cutscene. You want to skip every cutscene you can. A lot of the funnier cutscenes, you have to glitch a weird system. I actually got the glitch in the GDQ run, weirdly enough, unintentionally, because that just happens. But you're trying to bug out the game so it will load cutscenes at the end, which kind of just finishes them immediately or gets you right to a panic event, which will save time.
Oh, so there's a bit of tech. Okay, so there's tech where you're loading the cutscene at the end, more so than which is in effect skipping the cutscene, but it's not just like you're outright skipping the cutscene.
Right. The tech is going to be really stupid when I describe it. You are mashing buttons so you can skip a cutscene. That's the tech. Because some cutscenes in the game aren't skippable normally, but if you pretty much, I think, input crash it or something, that's my guess. The only way I've been able to do it is by mashing both my mouse and keyboard, so it sounds like I'm just going crazy with it. You will just straight up end certain cutscenes. You can go to the end of certain cutscenes. I knew it was possible when I accidentally discovered it on the GDQ grind, in fact, and it ended up allowing me to skip the final 2-minute auto-scroller cutscene and immediately go to the very end of it. I didn't do anything, actually. There's 2 ways of doing it. 1, you mash buttons and try to force it. 2, it will just happen.
That sounds perfect. Truly haunted experience.
It's the fun of the buggy game, yeah. So when I get to show off the funny cutscenes to people in a marathon run or my own stream, it's fun. But when I'm trying to grind for world record, it's a lot less fun because the run will die really early, and then people are like, "Oh, finish the run." I'm like, "Okay, I'll finish the run," because I'm having more fun that way, and most people are as well. So it's quite nice.
So, how did you feel about that whole experience of doing a game like NightCry at HDQ 2020? It seemed like you had a lot of fun with it, but I was just curious if you had any sort of takeaway from being able to put a game like that on that stage.
I got to be in two of my favorite blocks at the same time. A game I really had a lot of passion for and grinded the hell out of beforehand. Be able to run the first game technically in the quote-unquote Clock Tower series, because really Clock Tower series is a bunch of adopted games. Pretty good about it, actually. I had a great time doing it. I only really saw mostly positive reception about the run. It was also really weird at that GDQ in general, because everything got really messy with it.
What do you mean you got really messy with it? Like, just...
So the last GDQ, SGDQ 20, or AGDQ 2020, what happened was originally the horror block was going to be going on at 7 a.m. local time.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think it's supposed to be like originally 5 a.m. or something, maybe even something around there. But what happened was so many people messed up their runs and went over estimate. I went from 7 a.m. local to noon. So I went from being in like that weird like breakfast o'clock slot that's not too trafficked to having quite literally the afternoon highlight.
I mean, hey, you'll take it if you can get it, right?
Yeah, just sort of weird though, because even as a horror block runner, I'm kind of used to, hey, I'm going to be on at not human hours. I'm on late at night. I'm on during these weird hours, so it all works out there. But then it's like, hey, you're on at a good time. It's like, hey, that's weird, and made me a bit more nervous. But overall, it went really well from what I heard, and it was a lot more fun. Probably one of the best runs I've done in terms of marathon commentary.
Awesome, and hopefully more. I mean, as of the time of recording, I think everyone is eagerly awaiting the SGDQ online games list coming soon. So hopefully that'll be full of fun surprises for everybody.
It got delayed like 3 times, and I'm still waiting for a couple of runs to be publicly visible, so that kind of worries me.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the publicly visible stuff, I can't tell if that's just, superstition or what. I think I had initially had an issue with that in the first round of submissions where I made like a contract labor joke about Armored Core, and I was like, why isn't this submission visible? Uh-oh.
From what I can tell, it's probably they honestly haven't looked at it yet.
Probably, yeah.
I feel like maybe this weekend they're going to be cranking it out as a whole, or maybe they've been watching things or making the final decision. Because they don't need to see it. It doesn't need to be publicly visible. It's just I actually like games being publicly visible because then I can make lists of like what I think would be in the horror block. But for the first time in a couple of years now, I don't actually get to do that.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I think I heard you talking about that last night as well. Just that and I do the same thing too, where because I tend to do a variety of sort of quiet games, I love going through the list and just checking things out and saying, oh, who's running stuff? Because in some sense, the pool of GDQ submissions can be even broader than what's on speedrun.com, just because it brings out people who, might not want to submit to speedrun.com or, just don't know about it or whatever. And so it's always really cool to see just who's out there, doing stuff. So we'll see. Hopefully there'll be good stuff. But before we leave NightCry, I did want to I wanted to highlight in particular, it seemed like there was a really interesting bit of tech where you were, again, 3D point and click game, but you are able to interact with, like, for example, I think like a door or something at a distance, and this allows you to sort of get past a trigger. Is that right? Did I understand that right, or is this used for something else?
The way that works is as you pass through certain areas, there's going to be mini cutscenes. There'll be little death triggers that'll happen. Some of the ones you may have seen with the door, the only I can think of is the one where you are skipping something called Purgatory, which is an ending where your character gets sick and then dies. By using any item on the door that's beyond the checkpoint, when you get to the checkpoint, it'll say you can't use the item here instead of dying, so you can just keep moving forward, which kind of prevents the ability to die. And that allows us to kind of break the game without having to do all the major requirements, and instead you just don't do them because you can skip them. And then once you get to the end, the game's confused because it's assuming if you've made it this far and you've done all the other things that are required of you, well, you're good to go. Which you can do all those without having to do all the major ones, really enough.
No, that's always so convenient when a game just assumes, oh, if you're here, you must have done the other thing.
Yep. Which is why I also like a lot of like indie games and such and smaller games, because a lot of times the programming will kind of be there.
All right. Well, let's start let's start rounding things down a little bit. This is a good selection of games. The horror game stuff is a genre that I really, really love watching. I don't know if I'll ever play any of them myself, but there's a lot of really good horror speedrun streamers, and I definitely appreciate you providing some of the lowdown on some of these games. But this is a podcast interview series, which of course means I'm going to have a range of speedrunning guests. And one of the things that I like to do is form a little bit of connective tissue between the interviews, in which I will ask my guest to give me a question for my next guest. And it also means that the previous interview will have provided a question for the next one. And so my last guest was Makebake, who gave me this question. I didn't know it was going to be you, but now it is you. The question is, if you could combine two video game genres to make a new game, what would that be?
Ooh, see, that's a tough one because a lot of the games I like already kind of exist. Honestly, it's kind of hard. You mean like just a wildly brand new game, or just a new game that I think I would enjoy?
I would maybe lean towards the former, something wildly new, because I think you had mentioned already, especially by saying that you play horror and horror adjacent games, that might capture some of these cross genre games already. But if there is a new one that you would still want to play.
The only issue is I am aware of pretty much any horror kind of duality in almost any sense. There's been a lot of horror games of gaming recently, which would fit ones that normally you wouldn't think of. Mm-hmm. And also ones that you do think of already exist. Like I can't say RPGs because Sweet Home exists or Parasite Eve exists. Recently I actually saw a horror rhythm game, which is an interesting concept. There is also a horror like a bass fishing game, which I saw, so you can't say fishing. There's kind of horror for everything at this point, because with the advent of things like itch.io, there's been a lot more games coming out, so it's kind of hard to put my finger on it.
Well, if you want to leave horror, you're welcome to do that too. I'm not constraining you to say horror and something.
Be a bit better. Even then, though, it's kind of hard to say. Although, honestly, I would want there haven't been a lot like it. I would love more horror RTS.
Horror RTS, okay. Can you think of any horror RTS?
One. I want to say it is Alien Extinction was the name of it.
Okay.
It was an Alien versus Predator RTS. Let me double check it. Alien versus Predator Extinction, I think it was called. Extinction.
Remember RTS games?
No, I know. Yes, it was that one.
Okay, cool. No, that's an interesting thing. I've been doing a lot of research on discovering the history of mech games. And like when RTSs were popular, there were RTSs of everything, including mechs, and so it's sort of been funny to know that there's a horror one as well. Is on one hand not surprising, but still interesting, especially considering how dormant that genre is.
It's actually a really good one with a it's Alien vs Predator. I love that series, so it's pretty fun playing it. I played a lot as a kid on the PS2. I'm actually wondering if there's any speedruns for that.
Are there? I have to check too. I mean,
yes, actually.
Oh, there really are. Wow.
Let's see. That is a messy leaderboard. There is one IL run from the look of it.
Oh, the old IL runs in an RTS.
There doesn't seem to be much else barring that. As well, the leaderboard looks pretty dead. I don't know why they wouldn't just make it based on it feels like one of those things that can be easily fixed. I guess is what I'd be getting at.
All right. Well, on that note, how about you provide, again, this question can really be very broad. It can be silly. It can be gaming, speedrunning related. A question for my next guest. You don't know who that is. I don't know who that is.
All right. Let me think one really quick here. Question for the next guest. I think I'll go with what is the silliest game they've ever played?
What is the silliest game? That's a good one. That's solid.
Nice and safe, nothing too crazy, pretty broad.
No.
And then also one follow-up where they speedrun it.
Excellent. I hope the answer is the person's already done it, but we'll find out. That's for me to discover, I guess, that I'm scoping out future subjects. So let's look towards the future a little bit. I think we already started the interview with talking about how there's been an explosion of indie horror stuff. Are there particular games that you are excited about for the future, both as a casual player and a speedrunner?
Carry On and Remothered Broken Porcelain. And RE8. Also, that one game. Actually, there's a lot. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's like Ghost of Tokyo. That one looked good. I really want to play Destroy All Humans, actually. I think that's coming out with a reboot this month. I love that game as a kid, so I kind of want to see if it holds up at all. I don't think it will, but I do like that game.
That's always a fun trick. Does this game still work?
Yeah, especially as a reboot. It's like, is it going to be good?
All right. Well, that's a pretty good game. I did have RE8 in my bingo card there, but I'm also glad you mentioned Remothered as well, because that is a game that the first one, Broken Fathers?
Tormented Fathers.
Tormented Fathers. That you already speedrun, and to know that it's always excited to see some of those games really develop into series. So I'm glad to hear that. All right. Well, I think that's going to be about it. I wanted to give you an opportunity to, of course, I'm going to include links to your Twitch stream, your Twitter in the podcast description. Is there anything in particular that you want to plug? Things that you're working on, stuff like that?
Nothing too crazy. Most of just kind of the same. General excitement for GDQ, running games. Should all pretty much be in the same spot, I'd say. Excellent.
So yeah, if people want to see you, they will find you at the twitch.tv/Ecdycis. Of course, that link will be below. You can also follow you on Twitter, among other things. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, especially because I know our schedules don't exactly coalesce too well. So thank you so much for making the time and telling us all about the games you run.
No problem.
All right,
glad to be here as well.
But I got one more request of you to help end the podcast. I'm going to do like a catchphrase, like let's boost on out of here. And when I say that, I need you to do your best like rocket engine booster noise to end the pod.
Right.
You got that?
I'll try my best. See what we can do here.
Excellent. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Let's boost on out of here.